Hello, good morning everyone, Richard here. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to have another lens review, and this time we are looking at an anamorphic lens. It is Sirui Venus 135mm t2.9 1.8 times anamorphic lens. It is the latest addition to Sirui's full-frame Venus anamorphic lens lineup. This lens is available for Sony E, Canon RF, Nikon Z, and also L-mount, which is the one that I'm using for this review. This is a completely mechanical lens as we can probably expect it, and there's no electronic contacts or any electronic features. And a quick disclaimer before we continue. The lens I used in this review was sent to me by Sirui for this review. I don't have to return it after this review, but as usual, Sirui has no control of the content of this review. But Sirui does give me a special discount code for me to share with my viewers, so if any of you are interested in buying this lens, you can use the special link in the video description below to enjoy some special discounts. So this 135mm anamorphic lens is the longest focal length of the Venus lineup, and not surprisingly the size of this lens is also the largest. It's roughly the same as the Lumix 70-200 f4 lens, so it's not a small lens at all. But for an anamorphic lens, especially with the 135mm focal length and a t2.9 maximum aperture, it is actually pretty reasonable size. While the size of this lens is different to the rest of the Sirui's Venus lineup, it has the same 82mm front filter thread. The position of the focus ring and the iris ring are also at the same place, so that makes it easy to swap between all the different Venus anamorphic lenses. However, one very interesting thing is that this lens has the 1.8 times squeeze factor, while the rest of the Venus lenses are 1.6 times. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And if you are new to anamorphic lenses, I will explain to you what squeeze factor is very soon as well. The focus ring and the iris ring of this lens both feel very smooth. There are markings on both sides, both the left side and the right side of the lens. The focus flow is around 120 to 130 degrees or so it's not very long. I would prefer it to be slightly longer, but then to be honest, I didn't find much issue when using this lens. The lens doesn't come with any lens hood, but there is a tripod mount on the lens just like the rest of Sirui's Venus anamorphic lenses. However, I do find the tripod mount is a little bit small and it doesn't provide enough friction for a lens of this size and weight. So when I use the lens tripod mount to secure the lens on my tripod, it would become loose quite easily, so I end up just go back and use the camera's tripod mount instead. I would certainly love to see a bigger tripod mount on the lens in the future. With the whole lens pretty much all made of metal, the lens feels very solid and also feels very well made as well. The build quality feels just as good as some other anamorphic lenses that I have tried that cost a few times the price. The special thing about anamorphic lens is that the image is compressed or squeezed in the horizontal direction. The amount of compression or squeeze is called the squeeze factor. So with this Sirui lens, the focal length is 135mm and it has a 1.8 times squeeze factor. So what that means is the vertical field of view is the same as a normal spherical 135mm focal length lens, but horizontally it is equal to 135 divided by 1.8, so it is 75mm focal length in the horizontal direction. So an anamorphic lens is like a lens with two different focal lengths, and that's why the photo or video that you shot with the anamorphic lens would look compressed in the horizontal direction. So for the image to look normal, what we have to do is called de-squeeze, which basically means expanding the image in the horizontal direction with the squeeze factor, or you compress in vertical direction with the same squeeze factor. Doing it either way during post-processing will give you back the undistorted picture. Now, since you have to de-squeeze the image by the squeeze factor during post-processing to make the image look correct, the final output image aspect ratio would also be a bit different with what the camera would usually capture. If you use it with a camera that can only shoot video in 16:9 aspect ratio like the normal 4K video, then it will give you 3.2:1 aspect ratio, which is quite a bit wider than usual. But of course, you can always crop a bit if you want something that is not as extreme as 3.2:1. If you are shooting with this 1.8 times anamorphic lens with a camera like the Lumix S5 which has the 3:2 aspect ratio open gate mode, you would get aspect ratio of 2.7. This is the exact aspect ratio of the Hasselblad Expand photo camera, and if you have watched some of the previous videos on this channel, you know that I love that aspect ratio a lot, and because of that, I have been using this lens to shoot quite a bit of photos as well. I will talk more about using this lens for photo a little bit later on in this video. If you shoot video in 4:3 aspect ratio, then the discrete video would have the 2.4:1 aspect ratio. Now, as I mentioned before, this 135mm lens is the only lens in Siray's Venus series that has a 1.8:1 squeeze factor. All the other Venus lenses has the 1.6:1 squeeze factor. Exactly why Siray made this a 1.8 times squeeze factor lens is a bit of mystery. I have read the official reply from Siray. To be honest, that doesn't really make too much sense to me. But what that means is, if you are shooting with the different Venus anamorphic lenses, your final discrete image using this lens would have approximately 12% difference in aspect ratio, so this lens output will be a bit wider. You will need to do a bit of scaling and cropping during editing to get the uniform aspect ratio. So the 1.8 times squeeze factor is the official squeeze factor. Many anamorphic lenses do not have a constant squeeze factor. What it means is the squeeze factor would change depends on the focus distance. A lot of anamorphic lenses would have a lower squeeze factor when the lens is focusing at close distance. So I did some tests to see what is the actual squeeze factor of this lens. What I did is I took a picture of my sharpness test chart, which has a perfect circle. Then I checked the vertical versus horizontal size of the circle. If I took the picture using a normal spherical lens, then the width and height of the circle should be the same. But with an anamorphic lens, the width would be less than the height, and the ratio between the width and the height would be the squeeze factor. So I took a few photos with the Siray lens at different focus distance, and I checked the squeeze ratio using the method that I just described it. From my measurement at infinity focus distance, the squeeze factor is around 1.73. Now I want to point out this is just my measurement, so it's not 100% accurate, but it is not too far from the official figure, which I believe is 1.76. Then the squeeze factor becomes slightly lower, 1.72 at around 10 meter focus distance, and it remains pretty much the same even when I change the focus distance to 3 meter. Then at the minimum focus distance, the squeeze factor becomes around 1.7. So it seems the squeeze factor would become slightly lower at the close distance, which is not unusual for anamorphic lens, but the difference isn't really huge when you compare it with the infinity focus. Most of our full frame or APS-C camera has the 3:2 aspect ratio sensor. So if you shoot photo using this anamorphic lens, it will give you 2.7:1 aspect ratio. To me, this is amazing. A lot of you will probably know that I love to shoot with the 65:24 aspect ratio mode with some of my Lumix cameras because that would give me the 2.7:1 aspect ratio, a really wide photo that is the same as the Hasselblad Expand film camera. But one downside of shooting with the 65:24 aspect ratio on a normal camera is that it is basically cropping away the top and the bottom bit of the photo. So I'm using like only a little bit more than half the sensor area for the photo. But if you are shooting with the anamorphic lens, you are shooting using the whole sensor and then you compress it in post-processing. So it should give you better image quality, especially when it comes to low light performance. The only issue I have is that even when I'm shooting with the Lumix S5 2X, which is already one of the best camera in the market at this price point in terms of anamorphic support, there is no anamorphic discrete preview in photo mode. So I have to keep switching to the video mode to get the anamorphic discrete preview for framing, and then I have to switch back to photo mode to take the photo. But of course, it has nothing to do with the lens, it's just a limitation of the camera. Hopefully, with anamorphic lenses become more and more popular, camera manufacturers would implement better photo mode anamorphic support very soon. Okay, now let's have a look at the image sharpness, and let's start with the center first. At t2.9, while I won't say the center is super sharp, I think the sharpness is still very acceptable. Stopping down the lens would gradually improve the center sharpness, and we will reach the maximum sharpness at T8. Stopping down the lens further and the image would become slightly softer due to diffraction. And now we'll have a look at the corner. At t2.9, the corner is slightly soft, but I can still read the small numbers on the test chart, so it's not too bad. Stopping down the lens to t5.6 and the corner sharpness would reach its maximum level. Interestingly, focusing at the center of the image or focus at the corner makes virtually no difference to the corner sharpness even at t2.9. Usually, anamorphic lenses do not have very good close-up shooting capability. It doesn't matter if it's some very expensive anamorphic lens or the more affordable one. That's why very often you will see people adding diopter filter in front of the anamorphic lens to allow focus at close distance. But with this Sirui anamorphic lens, the minimum focus distance is 0.9 meter, which doesn't sound very close, but remember it is a 135mm focal length lens, so at 0.9 meter, its magnification ratio is quite a bit better than most anamorphic lenses in the market. You can do close-up portrait shot and have the model's head fill up the frame very easily. And the sharpness when shooting at the minimum focus distance is also very good. At t2.9, the sharpness is pretty acceptable. Stopping down to t4, the sharpness is now very decent. Stopping down the lens further would improve the sharpness a little bit until around T11, then the image starting to become a bit softer due to diffraction. For many people, one main reason to get an anamorphic lens is to get that oval shaped bokeh that we usually see in a lot of Hollywood movies. Look at this photo shot at T2.9 and you can see the bokehs are indeed tall oval shape. But after I apply the discrete, the bokehs are only slightly oval shape. I definitely expect a 1.8 times anamorphic lens would generate more oval shaped bokeh. The bokeh is pretty smooth though, doesn't look nervous at all. When I stop down the lens, the outline of the bokeh still look pretty smooth. When I look at some other real-world videos or photos that I shot with this lens, I really quite like the bokeh from this anamorphic lens and also how the background is rendered. In terms of chromatic aberration, Sirui did a pretty good job with this 135mm anamorphic lens. I'm not saying there's no chromatic aberration at all, as I do see a bit of chromatic aberration in this test photo, but this is like pretty much the worst example that I got. When I go through all my other videos and photos, I really don't see much color fringing at all, even when I was shooting at wide open. Now let's have a look at distortion. If we look at this usual brick wall test photo, I can see a small amount of pin cushion distortion. While it's not terrible, the amount is a bit more than what I expected from a 135mm lens. Okay, next, lens flare. So there are two things that I want to talk about in this review. One is the normal lens flare performance, and then the anamorphic lens flare or the anamorphic streak. So for the lens flare performance, I found this Sirui lens actually is pretty good. Even when I shoot into a strong light source, there isn't too much ghosting and the contrast remains pretty decent. But as you can probably see, you have the blue streak, the anamorphic streak. And let's talk about that. So no matter you like it or not, the anamorphic streak is, for a lot of people, the big reason why they want to shoot with an anamorphic lens. So not everybody likes it. I myself quite like it, but if there is too much, then I can also feel it could be a bit overwhelming. So with this 135mm anamorphic lens, it seems Sirui has made some fine-tune compared to some of their previous anamorphic lenses. The blue streak is a lot more subtle, so in some scenes I don't really see that blue lens flare at all, even when there's a light source in front of the camera. But don't worry, when the light source is strong enough, then you can get a decent dose of the blue lens flare for your anamorphic look. I think the blue streak looks nice, but here are some video footage that I shot with this lens and I will let you to decide it yourself. If you want to get some sun stars from this anamorphic lens, you need to stop down to at least T8, then you're starting to get a bit of sun stars. If you stop down all the way to T16, then you can get some pretty nice and sharp looking 12-point sun stars. In terms of focus briefing, here is a test clip that I changed the focus distance from 1 meter to infinity. Yes, there is quite a bit of focus briefing, but I think it's not too bad for an anamorphic lens with 135mm focal length. Anamorphic lens used to be something that only movies or large budget video production can afford. But over the last few years, anamorphic lens has become a lot more popular. Many videographers or even photographers would start to include anamorphic lenses as part of their workflow. It's partially because there are now many more cameras which has really good anamorphic support, like the Panasonic S5 IIX that I use in this review, that has the anamorphic de-squeeze display and also anamorphic in-body image stabilization built into the camera. But the other major reason is that there are more and more affordable anamorphic lenses in the market, and Sirui is arguably the biggest contributor. They have created more than 10 affordable anamorphic lenses within just a few years. I myself have shot with quite a few different anamorphic lenses over the last few years, and this Sirui 135mm lens is probably the one that I enjoyed the most. The image quality is really good. While looking at the test chart photos, it may not look like a very sharp lens, but I can tell you this is easily one of the sharpest anamorphic lenses that I've tried myself. I think some filmmaker may even think this lens is a little bit too sharp. But at least it is easy if you want to soften up the image a bit by adding a diffuse filter if you prefer a softer look. The out of focus area rendering, lens flare are all handled very well. I thought the bokeh could be a bit more oval shape, but it still gives me that very distinctive anamorphic look. If you have never used an anamorphic lens before, you may find the lens is quite a bit larger and heavier than the normal prime lens of this sort of focal length. But actually, for a 1.8x squeeze full frame T2.9 anamorphic lens, the size and weight of this lens is not bad. In fact, it is smaller and lighter than quite a few other anamorphic lenses that I've tried before. I myself have carried this Sirui anamorphic lens with me to shoot some events and also just walk around in the city for the whole evening. Do I want it to be lighter and smaller? Yes, of course. But I think the weight and size is still very manageable. So overall, I'm pretty impressed by this Sirui anamorphic lens, and I definitely had a lot of fun shooting with it over the last month.